Hey everyone, we all know and love Star Wars, right? But today we're going to look at it through a totally different lens. We're diving into a wild theory that suggests this epic story isn't fiction at all, but maybe, just maybe, a forgotten piece of real galactic history. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole really goes.
So that's the big question right there. The saga that captured the hearts and minds of the entire planet? What if it isn't just a brilliant story? What if it's an echo of something that actually happened? Now look, it's no secret that George Lucas pulled from all sorts of amazing sources. We know about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, we know about Buddhism, and those old samurai flicks. But the sources we're digging into today hint at something way more direct.
Okay, here's the core idea, and it is a big one. The theory is that George Lucas, maybe without even fully realizing it, tapped into a kind of collective memory, a psychic record of actual historical wars that raged for thousands of years in the Orion star system between the forces of light and dark. So you're probably asking, okay, where does an idea like that come from? Well, let's unpack the evidence by looking at the parallels found in several, let's call them channeled sources. Now, it's super important to note that many of these texts were actually written after the original movies came out. That leads a lot of people to think they were just inspired by Star Wars. But let's take a look at the connections they make, and you can decide for yourself.
This chart really lays out the big ones. You've got a source called the Law of One, describing a service-to-self empire. I mean, come on, that sounds exactly like the Galactic Empire. Then Prism of Lyra talks about these endless cyclical wars creating refugees, which is the whole story of the rebellion versus the Empire. The parallels from cloning to redemption are honestly pretty startling when you see them side by side.
So let's break that first one down, the Orion Empire. This text, the Law of One, describes this incredibly powerful service-to-self empire that's all about conquest, mind control, and psychic warfare. It's almost a perfect mirror of the Galactic Empire and the whole Sith ideology: domination, manipulation, and ruling through pure fear.
And of course, for every dark empire, there's gotta be a rebellion, right? The same material talks about an opposing service-to-others group called the Confederation of Planets. Their whole purpose? Protecting freedom. It's the Jedi Order and the Rebel Alliance, plain and simple, the guardians of peace fighting for freedom.
And this timeline really shows you the incredible scale we're talking about here. According to the Prism of Lyra, this wasn't just one war. We're talking about cycles of conflict that went on for ages. Empires would rise, then they'd fall, creating these huge waves of refugees, just like the never-ending galaxy-wide struggle we see in the movies.
And the parallels just keep coming. Other sources, like Bringers of the Dawn, talk about genetic manipulation and control happening in Orion. Well, hello, Emperor Palpatine and his obsession with clones and the Skywalker bloodline. And Darth Vader's final turn back to the light? That lines up perfectly with a prophecy about the healing and reintegration of Orion's own fractured soul.
Okay, so the cosmic parallels are pretty wild, but what if there's a connection that brings this all the way back home, right here to Earth? This next piece of the puzzle is a pretty surprising link to ancient Egypt.
The key here is the word Jedi. Now, according to some texts, the Jedi were these high-level initiates in ancient Egypt. They were the guardians of sacred knowledge, tasked with protecting humanity through the dark times. And, most importantly, they were said to have extraordinary, supernatural abilities.
So, Jedi, deity, you see it, right? The crucial point these sources make is that this similarity is not a coincidence. They believe it's an echo, a breadcrumb trail in our own history that points back to a real spiritual path of initiates who existed right here on our planet.
All these parallels are fascinating for sure, but they really lead to an even bigger question. Why does this story hit so hard for billions of people? Why did it feel so familiar to us right from the very beginning?
This quote from the source material just cuts right to the chase. The argument here is that the story feels familiar because, on some deep subconscious level, it is familiar to us. So here's how they break it down. In this view, the archetypes, the hero, the villain, the wise old mentor, they aren't just story elements. They're memories. The idea is that many of us actually carry what you could call karmic imprints, deep soul-level memories from past experiences in these exact conflicts. So when George Lucas created Star Wars, he basically pushed humanity's collective memory button.
So, if this is a memory, is there a lesson in it for us right now today? Well, the sources argue that the entire saga is basically one profound teaching for humanity, and it all boils down to a single, fundamental choice.
And here are the two paths, laid out clear as day. On one side, you've got the path of empire, control, and fear, what the texts call service to self. And on the other, you have the path of the rebellion, freedom, and love, service to others. This is the core conflict that drove the Orion Wars, and it's the choice that defines every single character in Star Wars.
And really, this is what brings the whole cosmic drama down to a super personal level. The real battle, this theory suggests, isn't fought with starships and lightsabers. It's the internal one, fought every day inside each and every one of us. The choice between serving our own ego or aligning with the greater good. You know, the force within.
So we're left with this one last thought, that iconic opening line. What if it's more than just the start of a fairy tale? Could it be the beginning of a memory? Our own collective history being told back to us so that we might finally wake up? That's definitely something to think about.